The audacity of the moment hung in the air like stagnant smoke, choking the life out of the room I had loved for 40 years. My daughter-in-law, Camilla, did not just place her designer handbag on my coffee table. She dropped it with a heavy thud, a sound that claimed territory. She looked at me, her eyes devoid of warmth, and delivered the sentence that would shatter the fragile peace of my widowhood. "She is going to live here, Mother, and she is going to teach you how to maintain this environment properly." I looked at my son, Julian. He was standing by the window, refusing to meet my gaze, his silhouette framed by the gray light of a rainy Seattle afternoon. I laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound that scraped against my throat. Teach me? In my house? The house I paid for with double shifts at the cannery, with knuckles swollen from arthritis and a back that aches every time it rains? Camilla's perfectly manicured hand twitched. For a second, I saw the mask slip. I saw the flash of raw, unfiltered rage in her eyes, the impulse to strike me, to physically silence the woman who dared to defy her. She raised her hand slightly, a reflex of violence, but she stopped. She lowered it slowly because she saw something in my face that terrified her. She saw that I was not just an old woman. I was a survivor. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 62 years old, and 3 weeks after burying the only man I ever loved, I learned that the sharpest daggers are not held by enemies in the dark, but by the people you invite into your living room. The intrusion had begun an hour earlier. I was in the kitchen, scrubbing the grout between the tiles with a toothbrush, a habit I developed when my husband, Silas, got sick. Cleaning was control. Cleaning was the only way I could keep the chaos of grief at bay. When I heard the key turn in the front lock, my heart leaped. Only 2 people had keys, me and Julian. I had rushed to the hallway, wiping my hands on my apron, hoping for a hug, a shared memory, a moment of comfort. Instead, I found Julian marching in with muddy boots, tracking dirt onto the hardwood floors. Silas had refinished the summer before he passed. Behind him was Camilla, carrying 2 large suitcases and a look of disdain that curled her lip as she surveyed my home. "Hello, Julian," I had said, my voice trembling with a mixture of hope and confusion. He walked past me as if I were a piece of furniture that had been placed inconveniently in the hallway. He dropped the bags on the Persian rug I had saved for 5 years to buy. Camilla kicked off her heels, leaving them in the middle of the walkway, and collapsed onto my sofa. "We need to talk, Mom." Julian's voice was unrecognizable. It was devoid of the warmth, the hesitation, the gentle cadence of the boy who used to bring me wildflowers. It was a cold, rehearsed monotone. It was the voice of a man reciting a script he had been forced to memorize. I sat in the armchair opposite them, feeling the space between us expand into a canyon. "What is happening, Julian? Why do you have suitcases?" Camilla leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees. She offered me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a predatory expression, the kind a wolf gives a lamb before the slaughter. "We are worried about you, Eleanor. You are not coping well. The house is slipping. You are slipping." I looked around the room. Not a speck of dust on the mantel. The windows were gleaming. The air smelled of lemon and beeswax. "Slipping?" I asked, my voice low. Camilla sighed, a theatrical exhale of patience she did not possess. "Look at you. You are wearing an apron at 2 in the afternoon. You smell of bleach. You are obsessed with cleaning because you cannot handle your reality. We are moving in to help you manage, to teach you how to run a household that is appropriate for the modern standard, and quite frankly, to make sure you do not ruin the property value." The property value. The words hung there, naked and ugly. I looked at Julian again. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for him to tell his wife that his mother was the strongest woman he knew, that this house was a monument to 40 years of sacrifice. But Julian just stared at his boots, studying the mud he had tracked in, looking like a scolded child. That was the moment the realization hit me, cold and hard as a stone in the gut. My son was gone. This shell of a man belonged to her. I stood up slowly. The fury that rose within me was volcanic. "You will teach me nothing, Camilla. Not in this house." Camilla's smile vanished. "Excuse me?" I took a step toward her. "I bought this house when you were still learning to walk. I paid for every brick, every shingle, every nail. I paid for it with sweat, with missed meals, with holidays spent working overtime while everyone else was opening presents. You think you can walk in here and take over because I am a widow? Because you think I am weak? My voice rose, filling the room, bouncing off the walls that had witnessed my life. Camilla stood up, her face flushing a deep, angry red. Watch your tone, Eleanor. I am your son's wife. I demand respect. I laughed again, and that was when she raised her hand. That was when the air left the room. Respect is earned, I whispered, staring her down. It is not demanded, and certainly not by a thief in designer clothing. Julian stepped between us, his hands raised. Mom, stop. Do not talk to her like that. We are just trying to help. Help? I looked at my son, truly looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes, the desperation to please her. Get out. Julian blinked. What? Get out of my house. Both of you. Take your bags and get out. Camilla grabbed her purse, her chest heaving. You are making a mistake, Eleanor. A huge mistake. You are going to regret this. Come on, Julian. She stormed out, the heavy oak door slamming behind her with enough force to rattle the picture frames. Julian lingered for a second, looking at me with a mixture of guilt and resentment, before turning and following her. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I sat back down in my armchair and listened to the sound of their car engine fading down the street. I was alone, truly alone. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in the dark, watching the shadows lengthen across the floor. I thought about the trajectory of my life. I thought about Silas, about how we had built this sanctuary against the world. And I thought about Julian. The red flags had been there for years, fluttering in the periphery of my vision, but I had chosen to ignore them. A mother always wants to see the best in her child. I rewound the tape of the last few years in my mind, playing back the memories I had suppressed. It started small. 2 years ago, on my 60th birthday, Silas was still alive then, though his heart was already failing. We had planned a small dinner. I had roasted a leg of lamb, Julian's favorite. I had baked a tart. We set the table with the fine china. We waited. 7 o'clock came and went. Then 8, then 9. Silas held my hand across the table as the food went cold. He tried to make excuses. Maybe traffic was bad. Maybe a meeting ran late. Finally, at 10, the phone rang. Mom, I can't make it. Camilla isn't feeling well. She has a migraine. His voice had been flat, unbothered. He didn't sound sorry. He sounded like a man checking a box. It's okay, son, I had said, swallowing my tears. Give her our love. Then there was Thanksgiving, then Christmas. Always an excuse, always Camilla. She was tired. She was stressed. Her family needed them. We were slowly being erased from his calendar, relegated to the margins of his life. The worst memory, the one that stung the most, was from 6 months ago. Silas was in the hospital, in the final stages. He was lucid, but weak. He kept asking for Julian. He wanted to say goodbye. I called Julian every hour. He is dying, Julian. You need to come now. I can't, Mom. Camilla booked this weekend getaway months ago. We are 3 hours away. We can't just leave. I held the phone away from my ear, unable to comprehend the words. He is your father, Julian. We will try to come tomorrow. Silas died that night. He died holding my hand, his eyes fixed on the door, waiting for a son who never came. Julian arrived for the funeral, wearing a black suit that looked too expensive, standing next to Camilla, who checked her watch 3 times during the service. He cried when they lowered the casket, but I felt nothing when I hugged him. He felt like a stranger. Now, sitting in the darkness of my living room, I realized that the erasure was intentional. It wasn't just thoughtlessness, it was a campaign. Camilla had been systematically severing his ties to us, isolating him, rewriting his priorities until we were nothing more than an obligation he wanted to shed. And now that Silas was gone, she was coming for the final prize. The house. The realization chilled my blood. This wasn't about helping me. This was a takeover. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity that cut through the grief. I was not going to be a victim. I was not going to let that woman dismantle my life. I made a pot of coffee, black and strong, and went to the study. I unlocked the fireproof safe, where Silas kept our important papers. I went through everything. The deed, the insurance policies, the bank statements. Everything was in my name. The house was paid off. Financially, I was secure. But I knew that wouldn't stop someone like Camilla. 3 days passed in silence. Julian did not call. I did not reach out. The impasse was a physical weight in the house. On the 4th day, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Vance? Yes. My name is Marcus Sterling. I am an attorney specializing in elder law and estate protection. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance, although you might not know it yet. My grip on the receiver tightened. Who? I was contacted earlier this week by a Mrs. Camilla Vance regarding your estate. She had some very specific questions about conservatorship and competency hearings. The room spun. I had to grab the edge of the desk to steady myself. She did what? She is inquiring about having you declared incompetent, Mrs. Vance. She claims you are suffering from dementia, that you are a danger to yourself, and that your assets need to be placed under the control of a guardian. Specifically, her and your son. I felt the bile rise in my throat. Incompetent? Me? I managed the logistics for a canning factory for 20 years. I balanced the books for our household down to the penny. Why are you telling me this, Mr. Sterling? Did she hire you? No. She tried to. But I have a policy, Mrs. Vance. I do not help predators. And I recognized the name. Or rather, I recognized her. What do you mean? I would like to meet with you. In person. There are things you need to see. Things about your daughter-in-law that your son probably does not know. I met Marcus Sterling at a diner downtown, far away from my neighborhood. He was a man in his 40s, sharp-featured, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He didn't touch his coffee. He just laid a thick manila folder on the table between us. Mrs. Vance, what I am about to show you is public record, but it takes someone knowing where to look to find it. Camilla Vance is not her first name. I opened the folder. The first page was a photocopy of a marriage license from 10 years ago. The bride was listed as Camilla Rourke. The groom was a man named Arthur Higgins, aged 72. She married Arthur Higgins in Florida. Marcus explained. He was a widower, retired, wealthy. 3 months after the wedding, Arthur was diagnosed with rapid-onset dementia. Camilla, or Camilla Rourke, as she was then, gained power of attorney. She liquidated his portfolio, sold his beach house, and placed him in a state-run facility. I stared at the grainy photo of the man. He looked happy in the picture. He looked like Silas. What happened to him? I whispered. He died 6 months later. Pneumonia. Alone. I turned the page. Another marriage license. 5 years ago. A different state. A different last name for her. A different victim. This time, a man named George Galloway. Same pattern. Rapid marriage, isolation from family, a sudden decline in health, legal control seizure, liquidation of assets. She is a black widow, Mrs. Vance. But she doesn't kill them with poison. She kills them with bureaucracy. She strips them of their autonomy, their dignity, and their legacy. And now, she has targeted your family. But because your son is young and doesn't have the assets she wants, she is using him as the vehicle to get to you. I felt sick. My son. My poor, foolish, weak son. He was sleeping with a monster. Does Julian know? I doubt it. She is very good at reinventing herself. New state, new name, new backstory. She likely told him she was an heiress or a businesswoman. She told us she was an interior designer, I said, the memory tasting like ash. Marcus nodded. Fits the profile. Allows her to enter homes, assess value, critique the living conditions. It is part of the psychological game. What can I do? They are coming for me, Marcus. She wants my house. We fight back, he said, his voice firm. But we have to be smart. If you confront her now, she will vanish. She will take your son and disappear, or she will escalate the legal battle and make your life hell. We need to expose her. We need to break the spell she has on your son. How? We set a trap. You are going to invite them to dinner. You are going to act as if you are reconsidering their offer to move in. You are going to make her feel safe. And then, we are going to drop the hammer. The preparation for that dinner was the hardest thing I have ever done. I had to call Julian and apologize. I had to lie to my son. Julian, I said, forcing my voice to sound frail. I have been thinking, maybe you were right. Maybe I am having trouble. The house is so big. I could hear the relief in his voice, and behind it, the triumphant whisper of Camilla. I knew you would see reason, Mom. We will come over on Friday. We can sign some papers, just to get the ball rolling. Friday arrived with a storm. Rain lashed against the windows, matching the turmoil inside my chest. Marcus arrived an hour early, parking his car down the street and slipping in through the back door. He set up in the kitchen, out of sight. With him was a woman I hadn't met before. "This is Sarah Higgins," Marcus said. "Arthur's daughter." She was a woman my age, her face lined with a grief that never truly healed. She took my hand. "I couldn't save my dad," she said, her voice shaking. "But I will be damned if I let her do it to you." We hid them in the pantry, leaving the door cracked just enough for them to hear. I went to the living room, smoothed my dress, and waited. When the doorbell rang, I composed my face into a mask of defeat. I opened the door. Camilla walked in first, looking radiant. She was wearing a red dress, vibrant and aggressive. Julian followed, carrying a leather portfolio. "Eleanor, darling," Camilla cooed, leaning in to give me an air kiss that didn't touch my skin. "I am so glad you came to your senses. It really is for the best." "Come in," I said softly. "Dinner is ready." I had made pot roast. It was comfort food. It was the food of deception. We sat at the dining table. The tension was palpable, vibrating through the silverware. "So," Julian said, opening the portfolio on the table, pushing aside his plate. "We brought the paperwork. It is basically a transfer of deed and a durable power of attorney. It just means that if anything happens to you, Camilla and I can handle the bills, the maintenance. It secures the asset." "Secures the asset," I repeated. "Is that what I am, Julian? An asset?" "Mom, don't start. We are doing this because we love you." Camilla placed her hand on his arm. "Let me handle this, sweetie. Eleanor, look at this house. It is old. It needs work. You are 62. Do you really want to spend your golden years worrying about plumbing and roof leaks? Sign the papers. We will build an in-law suite for you in the basement. You will have your own little space. It will be cozy." The basement. She wanted to put me in the basement of the house I built. I picked up the pen. My hand hovered over the paper. Camilla's eyes were glued to the tip of the pen, greedy and bright. "I have a question, Camilla," I said, putting the pen down. She blinked, annoyed. "What is it? Who is Arthur Higgins?" The silence that slammed into the room was deafening. Camilla froze. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like a physical blow. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Julian looked confused. "Who?" "Arthur Higgins," I repeated, looking directly at her. "Your first husband, or was he your second? It is hard to keep track of the dead men in your wake." Camilla stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. "I don't know what you are talking about. Julian, she is having an episode. See? This is the dementia. She is hallucinating names. We need her to sign now." I stood up too. I was not frail anymore. I was the storm. "You can come out now." The kitchen door swung open. Marcus walked out, holding the thick file. Behind him came Sarah Higgins. When Camilla saw Sarah, she made a sound I had never heard a human make. It was a strangled gasp of pure terror. "Hello, Camilla," Sarah said, her voice ice cold. "Or should I call you Vanessa? That was the name you used when you murdered my father." Julian stood up, looking frantically between the three of us. "What is going on? Who are these people?" "This is the daughter of the man your wife scammed and left to die in a state home," I said. "And this is the lawyer who has documented every single one of her crimes." Marcus tossed the file onto the table. It slid across the wood and hit the leather portfolio Julian had brought. "It is all there, Julian. The marriage certificates, the death certificates, the bank transfers. She isn't an interior designer. She is a predator. And you were just the key to get to my house." Camilla grabbed Julian's arm, digging her nails into his suit jacket. "Baby, don't listen to them. They are lying. They are trying to tear us apart. Your mother is jealous." "She has always hated me." Julian looked at the file. He opened it with trembling fingers. He saw the photos. He saw the timeline. He looked at Sarah, who was crying silently. He looked at me, standing tall and unmoving. "Is it true?" Julian whispered, his voice breaking. Camilla's face twisted. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. The sophisticated woman vanished, replaced by something feral and cornered. "You are pathetic," she spat at Julian. "You are a weak, spineless mama's boy. Of course it is true. Do you think I would marry you for your personality? You have no money, you have no ambition, but your mother, she has a nest egg. She has equity." Julian recoiled as if she had slapped him. She turned to me, eyes blazing. "You think you won, old woman? You think this is over? I will sue you for everything. I will claim emotional distress. I will." "You will do nothing," Marcus interrupted calmly. "The police are on their way. We filed the report this morning. Fraud, elder abuse, identity theft. The list is long. You aren't leaving this house in a luxury car. You are leaving in handcuffs." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Camilla ran to the front door, but Sarah blocked her path. "You aren't going anywhere," Sarah said. When the police led her away, Camilla didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stared at me with cold, dead eyes. But I didn't look away. I watched her until they put her in the car. Julian collapsed onto the sofa, my sofa. He buried his face in his hands and wept. It wasn't a quiet cry. It was the sobbing of a man whose entire reality had just dissolved. I sat next to him. I didn't hug him immediately. I let him cry. I let him feel the weight of his betrayal, the weight of his blindness. "I'm sorry, Mom. Oh God, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "I know you didn't know the details, Julian," I said softly. "But you knew you were hurting me. You knew you were abandoning me. You chose her over me, again and again." He looked up, his face ravaged. I was weak. I wanted to be loved. "She made me feel like I was someone else, someone better." "She made you feel like someone you are not," I corrected. The house was quiet again, but the air was different. It was cleaner. Marcus and Sarah left after giving their statements. Julian stayed. He didn't have anywhere else to go. Camilla had cleared out their joint account before coming over that evening. He was broken, and homeless. I made him tea. We sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I had scrubbed the grout, the same kitchen where I had fed him as a boy. "Can you ever forgive me?" he asked, looking into his mug. "Forgiveness is a journey, Julian. It is not a switch I can flip. You broke my heart. You let a wolf into our fold because you were too desperate to see the teeth. I understand. But," I continued, reaching out to cover his hand with mine, "you are my son, and this is your home. We will rebuild, but things will be different. You will not disrespect me again. You will not treat me as a burden. You will treat me as your mother. I promise." The months that followed were not easy. There was no magical montage where everything was suddenly perfect. There were awkward silences. There were moments of anger where I would remember a missed birthday or a cruel comment, and I would have to walk away to cool down. Julian got a job. He started paying me rent, not because I asked, but because he needed to regain his dignity. He went to therapy. He had to deprogram himself from years of manipulation. We worked on the house together. We painted the guest room. We planted a new garden in the spring. One afternoon, 6 months later, we were sitting on the porch. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the neighborhood. "I learned something, Mom," Julian said. "What is that?" "I thought being a man meant having a beautiful wife and not listening to your parents. I thought it meant detaching. But I realized that real strength is protecting the people who built you." I smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached my eyes. "We both learned something, Julian. I learned that I am not just a widow. I am not just a mother. I am the guardian of this family. And I learned that silence is not peace. Sometimes you have to roar to be heard. The foundation of a home is not bricks or mortar. It is respect. It is memory. It is the refusal to let anyone, no matter how charming, tell you that you are less than what you are." Camilla was sentenced to 15 years. It turned out there were 5 other victims. My testimony, along with Sarah's, sealed her fate. I still live in my house, My floors are clean. My windows gleam. But I don't clean to control the grief anymore. I clean because I am proud. This is my kingdom, and I am the queen who defended it. The greatest pain may come from the living, as I thought that dark night. But the greatest healing comes from the truth. And the truth is, dignity is the one thing you can never allow anyone to pack into a suitcase and take away.